Tonight on All In.
With Eddie Gallagher, you know that story very well. They wanted to take his pin away, and I said, no, you're not going to take it away. He was a great fighter.
Disturbing testimony from Navy SEALs about their platoon chief who was pardoned by the president and hosted at Mar-a-Lago.
He was one of the ultimate fighters. Tough guy.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We have shocking new footage of what the men in the unit of an accused war criminal thought about him. It's previously unreleased footage obtained by the New York Times of Navy SEALs describing actions by their platoon leader, a man by the name of Eddie Gallagher. Gallagher has become a figure at the center of an enormous moral scandal in the Trump administration, perhaps one of its worst. Over the summer, a military court acquitted Gallagher of most of the war crimes charges he'd been charged with, but he was found guilty of one lesser charge for posing for a picture with a man's corpse. And that resulted in him being demoted. And the military began the formal process of stripping his SEAL status. But then Donald Trump, against the wishes of top military leaders, intervened, restoring his rank, ordering the Navy to keep him in the SEALs. Now, it's worth noting that Donald Trump campaigned on a pro-war crime platform in 2016.
Would I approve waterboarding? You bet your ass I'd approve it. You bet your ass. In a heartbeat. In a heartbeat. And I would approve more than that. And don't kid yourself, folks, it works. He took 50 bullets and he dipped them in pig's blood. And he had his men load his rifles and he lined up the 50 people and they shot 49 of those people. And the 50th person, he said, you go back to your people and you tell them what happened. And for 25 years, there wasn't a problem, okay?
Now we're talking about waterboarding. I said it's fine, and if we want to go stronger, I'd go stronger too.
Given that, it's perhaps not at all surprising that Eddie Gallagher would become a kind of cause celeb for Donald Trump and his supporters. The president has reportedly told allies he wants to bring Eddie Gallagher out on the campaign trail with him for 2020. In fact, get this, just this past weekend, the president and First Lady hosted Gallagher and his wife at Mar-a-Lago. Here he's at dinner with Eric Trump and Rudy Giuliani. Here's the thing. Eddie Gallagher, a retired special operations chief of SEAL Team 7, the guy you saw posing with the president and his son and his personal lawyer, he was accused of some very, very serious war crimes in Iraq back in 2017. He was accused of the attempted murder of unarmed civilians, including an old man and a schoolgirl. He was accused of stabbing an ISIS captive multiple times. He was convicted of posing for a picture with that dead man's corpse. Now, Gallagher denies all the charges. Today, the New York Times published a trove of interviews, which have never been shown publicly before, statements made from Eddie Gallagher's fellow SEAL team members to investigators speaking out about what they saw. Some quotes. "The guy is freaking evil. The guy was toxic. You could tell he was perfectly okay with killing anybody that was moving." The Times also obtained video recordings of the interviews of SEALs describing the scene when Eddie Gallagher approached an ISIS captive that he was accused of stabbing. A warning that the first image may be disturbing.
Gallagher comes on the scene with his medic bag and pushes the kid down on the ground while he checks him for wounds. And right then you can see a hand reach up and turn off the helmet cam.
So what did you actually see Gallagher do?
All of a sudden, Eddie just starts stabbing the dude. I see Eddie laying over him with the knife, sticking into his neck.
Did Eddie say anything when he did this, or did he just literally pull out a knife and just start stabbing him?
He just pulled out a knife and started stabbing him.
How close do you think you were when you saw Gallagher stab him?
Me, body, Gallagher.
One time, multiple times?
It was probably 2 or 3 times.
NBC News did not reach out to the individual SEALs for comment on that video obtained by the New York Times, but the New York Times says they did reach out to every one of them, and they all declined comment. Eddie Gallagher's defense lawyer said the video interviews were rife with inconsistencies and falsehoods, and that those inconsistencies created a clear roadmap to the acquittal. His lawyer told All In the New York Times failed to give context to the videos, that the supposed eyewitnesses actually had inconsistent stories. The SEAL team members who were the witnesses didn't like Eddie Gallagher because he was too hard on them. There was a lack, they said, of corroborating evidence. One of the reasons that Eddie Gallagher was acquitted of murder had to do with a remarkable moment during his trial. Okay? where the prosecution's star witness, Special Operator First Class Corey Scott, a medic who said he saw Gallagher stab the ISAF captive multiple times, changed his story on the stand. He said that Gallagher stabbed the captive once and that he, Corey Scott, killed the captive by suffocation. No one was prepared for that. It was a shock to everyone in the room, at least for the prosecutors. And because that witness was testifying under an immunity that had been granted, he could then not be charged for the killing. And Eddie Gallagher was acquitted of the charges of murder of that captive, also acquitted of the attempted murder of civilians, but he was convicted of posing with the corpse of that dead captive. Now, we still do not know the story of what led to this medic to change his tune on the stand and basically admit to killing the captive, but we do know that after the trial, the Pentagon basically wanted to kick Eddie Gallagher out of the SEALs. And President Trump intervened, and he ordered them to reinstate Gallagher's rank. And that led to the very public resignation of the Secretary of the Navy, who so disagreed with the president's handling of the case, he quit. And Trump clearly thinks his embrace of Eddie Gallagher is a way to ingratiate himself with active duty members of the military and their families. But there are a lot of people inside the armed forces who are furious about this. In fact, recent polling from the Military Times shows half of active duty troops view the president unfavorably. Joining me now, Leo Shane. He's the deputy editor of the Military Times, which, of course, has been covering this story along with many other issues. And Andrew Dyer, who covers the military for the San Diego Union-Tribune. He was actually in the courtroom for the full duration of Edward Gallagher's trial. And Andrew, let me just start with you maybe about that moment. I mean, so much happens in the moment in which the star witness of the prosecution comes in and changes his story on the stand. What was that moment like in the courtroom?
Well, Chris, it was really surreal. Going into the trial, we had a pretty good idea of what each witness was going to say. It was in NCIS records. We kind of knew their stories. And when he said that he suffocated the fighter, that was something new, something we hadn't heard before. And, you know, it kind of washed over the courtroom in a wave. I almost had to replay it in my mind, like, did I just hear what I just heard? And yeah.
Do we know the full story? I'm going to follow up, and then I'll come to you in a second, Leo. But do we actually know the full story of what happened there? Like why the testimony changed?
Well, I talked to Gallagher's lawyer, Tim Parlatore, yesterday, and he said that in a preliminary interview with Corey Scott, he had gone up to the edge of this, and Corey Scott had said something about a suffocation, and Scott's attorney cut Parlatore off, saying that they weren't going to go any further without clarifying an immunity deal. And in the trial, before this section of testimony, the judge told Corey Scott that he was fully immune from whatever he was about to say on the stand.
Leo, this case has obviously attracted enormous attention. I wonder what, from your perspective at the Military Times, how it has reverberated through current active duty members.
Yeah, it's definitely a concerning case for a lot of folks because it seems as if Trump has waded into an area where we haven't traditionally seen presidents. Obviously, the president has the power to pardon or to grant clemency, but in this case, as you recapped, you know, Chief Gallagher was acquitted of the most serious charges, was found to be guilty of conduct unbecoming, and Navy thought they were dealing with it internally, and the president stepped in and said, no, we should forget that. We should look beside that. He's done 8 deployments. There's a lot of good in his background. So I'm going to intervene, you know, not just on the issue of the crime here, but all the way down to the issue of his rank, whether or not he'd be reinstated as a SEAL, whether or not he could call himself a chief anymore. So, you know, the reverberations are just a lot of shock as to, you know, the commander-in-chief coming down this far on a case that's already really complicated and really convoluted.
Andrew, how does the picture painted of Gallagher in the newly unearthed footage from the New York Times, how does that sort of fit or not fit with the image painted of him at trial?
Well, it does square with their testimony. In most cases, these SEALs testified to the same things that they had told investigators. I think it's important to note that 2 of these SEALs that were in these preliminary interviews were not called to testify at Gallagher's court-martial, including one, Petty Officer Ivan Villanueva, who initially told investigators he saw Gallagher stab the fighter, yet after Scott's testimony for whatever reason, the prosecutors decided not to call Villanueva, which has always stood out to me. And to this day, neither the prosecutors nor the Navy have offered any explanation why a witness to this alleged stabbing did not testify.
You know, part of the sort of question here, Leo, and I think the difficulty of this from a moral perspective is, you know, the president says he's looking out for our, quote, war fighters. But of course, there were members of his own unit that were so distressed by the actions that they took tremendous risks to come forward, to testify, to talk to investigators, and they have essentially been thrown by the wayside.
And that becomes the question here. Obviously, he's thrown himself in Gallagher's corner and said that he's standing up for warfighters by standing with him. But as we saw from the release today, you know, a lot of the public had heard that some of the SEALs didn't like him. I don't know what the effect will be of seeing just in black and white here, just you know, how emotional some of their testimony is and how many folks are sort of left in the wake of this. Now, you know, if you're a member of the military and you're seeing this and you see something improper downrange, what's your reaction going to be? Should you report this to your higher-ups? Is it something that you feel confident that the military code of justice is going to be upheld and going to be followed? Or is it something where down the line maybe it can be reversed and you get into trouble for being a whistleblower?
Yeah, that is a great point about what incentives have been set up by this one action. Not just one action, there's other pardons the president has issued as well. Leo Shane, Andrew Dyer, thank you, gentlemen, both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joining me now, John Soltz, former U.S. Army officer and Iraq war veteran, the co-founder and former chairman of the Vote Vets Advocacy Group. John, I know you feel strongly about this case. I've watched some of the things you've said. How do you feel about what has happened, what we learned today from that testimony, and what the president's involvement here means?
I think the first thing I took today from the testimony that came out of the New York Times, when you watch these veterans talk, you could feel the pain in their voices. And I think we could talk about a lot today. We talk about the ramifications of what this means for the United States and foreign countries. We could talk about the ramifications of what this means for our troops currently on the ground in combat. We could talk about what this means for future troops who, you know, maybe have seen something wrong they should turn in. But the pain that you hear in the voices of the SEALs as they go to explain what happened to them is heartbreaking, because what they were really, what I felt was that they were trying to relieve some of their own guilt of being around an incident or being around a chief who is their senior non-commissioned officer in this deployment do things illegal. And that this really was a cry for help for them to go to NCIS. And it's really hard for me to watch them deal with that pain.
There's also a broader question here about the way the president conceives of what U.S. policy should be about the commission of war crimes, about torture. He talked on the campaign about killing the family members of, quote, terrorists. He told that apocryphal story about a U.S. general dipping bullets in pig's blood. He seems to relish in the kinds of things that an entire structure has been erected within the U.S. Armed Forces over decades to prevent from happening.
He's basically telling the Navy, I don't trust you to manage your own business. And we've never seen anything like this. We've never seen a scenario where the military chain of command, the military justice system, basically is checkmated by the commander-in-chief. So you can basically do anything wrong right now in any of their service branches. And if you can get, you know, Pete Hegseth, who's a Fox News host, to promote you on a show the president watches, that he can certainly undermine the entire military chain of command. So he's damaged the military. He's damaged military leaders and military officers for what is essentially political drama that he wants to use for his own political benefit. And he's damaged an institution, just like he's damaged other institutions through his, you know, dealings during the impeachment. He's damaged the institution of the armed forces, which is still a respected institution. And I think that's really heartbreaking for everybody who's in the military or who has served in it.
You know, this calls to mind this polling that the Military Times did recently, which was really striking to me. Very unfavorable views. This is, I think, about active duty members. 45%. Very favorable, just 24%. Overall, underwater in favorability within the U.S. military. Does that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me. The president is on an elevator going down. I mean, there's a reason we have a website called Trump is a National Security Threat. He disrespected a Gold Star family, right? Khizr Khan. He has decided that he's going to pay for the border wall by taking money out of the Department of Defense school system. Just this weekend over Christmas, he decided he would depart deport family members of active duty military deployed. So it's, pardoning war criminals is par for the course with his war on the military. And so it doesn't surprise me that you see his poll numbers inside the military going from, where they were to down. And I will remind you, that's a Military Times poll. So that's a more conservative, reader base to start. So, this is a long-term sort of effect that he's had because it's been thing after thing after thing that's taken us to the point where I think, for the first time we could see, the military voter and the veteran voter really turn against the Republican president.
Last question for you has to do with the implications of what the president has done in this case and a few other cases, reaching in to the military justice system. What that will mean for someone in a unit who sees something they think is wrong or witnesses what is genuinely an atrocity or maybe something that just seems sort of off, and what's going to go through their mind when they think about whether to report that?
It's really hard what they did. The SEAL community is a very close-knit community. There was a case in Bamako, Mali in 2017 where a SEAL was involved with a murder of a Green Beret. And this had to do with the telling of misconduct. And so we have a scenario in the special operations community that's a little bit different, where people fear now, hey, if I break this code, what are the ramifications? Across the military as well. So I think now when people see misconduct that should be reported, that they know that that's their duty and obligation, there's going to be a fear going forward on whether or not they should report it at all. One thing is for certain, and to the SEALs that we met today on that video, they are heroes, and they can rest assured tonight that the American public knows that, and that the American public in 10 or 20 and 30 years will look at them in even a better light then than they do today.
All right, John Soules, thank you so much for making time tonight.
Thanks a lot, Chris.
Up next.